Welcome to Hot Topic. This week I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Andrew Wilson of the National Union of Farmers, the National Farmers Union, Andrew. Get the initials right around, the NFU. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.
Obviously, the big topics that we're going to be talking about today are the election, but the first one that we must discuss is Brexit and the future of the Common Agricultural Policy, by which people who work for a living taxed, and that tax, large amount of it is paid through the European Union to people who own large assets in land, farmers. Is this going to come to an end?
Well, I don't think it can come to an end, firstly, because obviously the Common Agricultural Policy, it is paid on direct land, but so the land that you own, you get paid on an area payment. Whether you will continue to get paid for land that you own, that's sort of up in the air at the moment. We're not sure which way that's going to go. But I think there's always a great myth about the Common Agricultural Policy that it is just handed out to people that own farms. I mean, if you look at sort of farm incomes, the subsidy payment is of the greatest proportion of income coming in for farmers. And also farmers are custodians of the countryside. So the countryside is managed by farmers and the CAP money is used to help manage that land. But if you're selling wheat, for example, at £110 a tonne, and that wheat costs you £120 a tonne to produce. If you don't have a subsidy payment, you're not going to have farmers staying in business for very long.
Well, let's just pick that apart a little bit. First of all, it is the Common Agricultural Policy, as it stands, as it is now within Europe, is a payment to people who own land, and it is
you can be a
direct or a tenant farmer.
You can be a tenant farmer,
but
and
effectively then to people who own land, because that tenant farmer will pay the ultimate freehold owner of the farm in rent. It is effectively an income for people who own assets that is paid for out of public taxed money. Then you make the point that if you are making wheat at it's costing you £120 a tonne and you're selling it at £110 a tonne, any other business would just go out of business if the costs of producing what they produce is greater than the revenue they can gain from that. Why are farmers different?
Well, because ultimately people need to eat. Wheat is a globally traded commodity.
Well, obviously they don't need to eat so much that they're going to pay £120 a tonne for wheat.
Yeah, but it's a globally traded commodity. But if you look at any developed nation in the world, New Zealand is a separate case study, but if you look at any developed nation in the world, agriculture is subsidised in every single one of those nations. So for the UK to not have subsidised agriculture would mean that we'd have food inflation in the shops. You'd suddenly have a business, or you'd have the largest manufacturing sector of the economy, which is the food and drink sector, going out of business, which contributes £108 billion to the exchequer. So agriculture underpins that sector. And if you don't have a farm subsidy system with the market that we've got at the moment, you don't have that part of the economy. You don't have the 478,000 people that are employed directly working on agricultural holdings in the UK. And I don't see how that would be a good thing for the UK economy.
Well, it would be a good thing for the UK consumer, literally the consumer, the eater of food, because if every other country is subsidising their agriculture, then it would be cheaper for us to not subsidise our agriculture and allow the other countries' taxpayers to be subsidising their agriculture and take the benefit of their cheaper food and their artificially cheap food.
Yeah, but where do you, how do you replace the £18 billion of agricultural exports that go from the UK? What do you do to employ the 476,000 people? And how do you replace the £108 billion that it provides to the exchequer? Where does that come from, and why would you want to do that?
Well, is that provision to the exchequer greater than the money that's paid out in subsidy?
Oh yeah, much greater.
What about the New Zealand model? They did. Back in the 1980s, they just absolutely stopped subsidising their agriculture.
Yep.
Partly because of the British entry into the European Union, when we stopped buying New Zealand agricultural produce, lamb, butter, things like that, and suddenly they lost that market and they stopped subsidising their agriculture, and it worked.
Yeah, it does work for New Zealand farmers, and if you were to say to a farmer in the United Kingdom, you can farm in the same way as a New Zealand farmer can, in terms of what ag chem they can use, in terms of what environmental measures that they use, you would have UK farmers biting your hand off to farm in that manner. I don't think the environmental lobbies would allow you to farm in the same way that they farm in New Zealand. And I also don't think the general public would allow for the great depreciation of the currency, which happened in New Zealand as well. So I think in terms of how the UK economy is a very different model to the New Zealand economy. So New Zealand economy is agriculture. In the UK, we have the banking sector, we have the manufacturing sector. They're two very, very different models. But I'm sure you would have farmers queuing up to farm in the New Zealand model, but the environmental lobby would never allow it, and I don't think the Treasury would allow the depreciation of our currency that would enable that to happen.
If we did follow the New Zealand model, would it absolutely require a devaluation of the currency? We're having a devaluation of the currency post-Brexit anyway. Is it necessary that the currency is devalued in order to do that?
Well, I think you'd have to, because certainly, I mean, how on earth would you compete with Europe? For a start, I mean, when you have Europe, it's the biggest customer of UK agriculture. So 40% of the lamb in the UK, for example, gets sold over in Europe. So I mean, how on earth would we be able to produce something that wasn't subsidised and sell it to a country where it is subsidised?
We're not going to be in Europe in a couple of years' time. What happens then? There won't be a common agricultural policy through the European Union subsidising farmers. What would you... none of us can tell the future, Andrew, and it would be very unfair of me just to ask for a prediction, but what would you hope will happen after Brexit?
Well, I certainly hope that we will have tariff-free trading with Europe. I mean, that's going to be quite key to our business and to UK agriculture. If you one very sort of interesting statistic that I heard recently was last year the United Kingdom exported more food to Belgium than it did to the BRICS countries combined, so Brazil, Russia, India, China. So we've got a lot of work to do if we're going to replace that market and have tariffs going into Europe, and that comes down to the British consulate services and trade envoys that need to go out there and do the deals to make sure that we can sell into those countries in a similar way that we are allowed access to Europe. But certainly at the moment, and the way things stand, we need that free tariff access into European markets.
And in terms of the subsidy?
In terms of the subsidy, it's going to be a different model. I'm sure it's going to be a different model, and we, certainly as a farming union, we would like to see payments that are made. The direct area payment, it's not popular with the general public, and there are reasons for that. And I think if we could look at sort of the payment is made towards promoting innovation in farms, to promoting efficiency in farms, to reducing cost of production. And the more barriers there are, or the more levels there are for the payment to be made, I think would be better. And you'd start to see more investment in businesses. You'd see a more modern industry. You'd see an industry with a lower cost of production. And I think that's what the CAP money should be used for, or what the farm subsidy money should be used for, to actually make UK agriculture a shining example to the world of how we've invested in the industry, as opposed to the system of just paying on a direct acreage.
Will the subsidy still cost, and this is a very tough question, forgive me, but it's going to involve arithmetic, but will it still cost sort of per capita, per British citizen, whatever it is that we pay as a percentage of our income that goes to the European Union, that then goes through to the Common Agricultural Policy back to British farmers? Is it going to cost us less, or is it going to cost us more?
I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows? It's completely up in the air. I certainly think, to start with, so you don't have an industry going off a cliff edge, it's going to have to certainly be funded in a similar way. But I hope that we can work with DEFRA and we can get something ready to go from 2020 onwards. I mean, that would be great. It would be a good starting point for the industry to move forward. There is talk of environmental sort of measures, and obviously a large proportion of farm subsidy is based on environmental measures, managing the countryside, and that is a whole broad area, and it does provide a lot of benefits to the countryside. I mean, one statistic is for every pound of, you mention, will taxpayers, stomach having, to continue funding the Common Agricultural Policy, but for every £1 of farm subsidy that's paid out in England, that adds £7.40 to the economy. So it's a good deal for the UK taxpayer as it stands at the moment, and we hope we can make that a better deal with having a more sort of modern, forward-thinking industry.
You mentioned that phrase you've used a couple of times, custodians of the countryside. Most people live in towns. Most people go to the countryside, once every couple of weekends or so, and drive through it and maybe have an afternoon out and a picnic in the summer. Most people don't benefit from the countryside.
Well,
most people in this country.
3.71 billion individual visits to the UK countryside, and I think it's 30% of everybody who visits the UK as a tourist visits the English countryside. And why do they go there? Because it's a beautiful place to be, and who looks after it? The farmers.
Why farm it then? Would it not be cheaper just to keep it as parkland, as it were, to have park rangers paid as park rangers rather than as landowners? And simply, if our objective is to keep the countryside looking beautiful and pretty, why farm it?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want to eat, that's a good option.
But I do want to eat, but I want to eat French cheese and Italian pasta. And sometimes, and this is an awful confession, Romanian wine.
Right.
But if it's just an aesthetic thing, then why is it necessary to pay for it as an industry?
Because the country needs to eat. You obviously have this huge sector which adds a great deal, over £108 billion in gross value value to the UK economy every year, employs nearly enough 500,000 people, and is the largest manufacturing sector when you add combined food and drink in the country. So therefore, I don't really understand the logic of why you would want to eradicate an industry.
I'm so sorry, Andrew, I must stop you there. Join me again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. I'm still with Andrew Wilson of the Lincolnshire National Farmers Union. I've got the words in the right order that time, Andrew.
Pleased to hear it.
The NFU. Another consequence of withdrawal from the European Union is that there's one of the reasons people voted for withdrawal from the European Union is to prevent European people coming and working in the United Kingdom. How's that going to affect agriculture, especially in Lincolnshire, especially in southern Lincolnshire?
Well, it's going to have a big effect, and we're already seeing the effects as we are at the moment. Before free movement has ended, which I believe it will in 2019, is what's been discussed at the moment. So we're already struggling as an industry to attract people to come and work over here. Currency has had an impact on that as well. That's one of the factors. But the other factors are uncertainty and also security. So, for example, in the UK, it's around in the UK there's around 80,000 migrant workers working in agriculture. And the industry relies on them, particularly here in Lincolnshire. You have the pickers, the graders, the packers, the delivery people, generally predominantly sourced from European labour, and certainly for us as a farming union and for us as an industry, we are pushing the government to add clarity on what is going to happen post end of free movement to people, and we want to make sure that there are schemes in place to allow these people to come over here and work, and also feel secure that they're working over here and not have a burdensome process for them to come over here and work. I mean, you should never discourage somebody from wanting to come and work.
The Grimsby and Cleethorpes in the north of the county and Boston in the south of the county of Lincolnshire were the highest votes against the European Union, the highest Brexit votes.
Yep.
And there is a correlation there between, certainly in the southern part of the county of Boston, between the number of migrant workers who are here and the number of British citizens, British subjects, who voted in order to come out of Brexit, to come out of the European Union, largely motivated by resistance to immigration. Were they shooting themselves in the foot?
It's difficult to say. I mean, people voted in the EU referendum for a whole host of issues and quite emotive issues. There's obviously a correlation, as you mentioned, between the two towns, and certainly in Boston and up here in Grimsby, there you do have a reasonably large migrant workforce or immigrants living here in these towns. Whether or not they're shooting themselves in the foot, I mean, who knows? But for people that want to come and work, the jobs are there, and as an industry, we are certainly struggling now to attract people to come and work. And there's this myth that migrant workers don't get paid much money, but they get living wage. They get minimum wage or living wage depending on their age when they're over here. And
that isn't much money.
But it is a low skill job, working in the fields. But then what I think is just fantastic is when you see the progression going through. So you will then see a migrant worker that's come over here, and then suddenly they will get qualified to drive tractors. They'll get qualified to do heavy goods vehicles, and then they start to go up, and they will have families, and then they work in catering trades, supermarkets. And hotels and things, and you suddenly start to see people getting a footing in this country, working hard, and then working their way up through different types of work. And I think, for one, it's a great thing. It's a good thing for agriculture, and it's a complete myth that people are coming over here taking our jobs. When that was touted around with the referendum, it's still been touted around now. It's a complete myth, because if you are a UK-born national and you're saying that in Lincolnshire, you could find a job tomorrow if you wanted it.
Enough of Europe. I think we've all talked about that far too much so far. Let's talk about environmentalism. You mentioned when we were talking about New Zealand in the first half that they have a completely different attitude to the rules by which they must tend the environment over there. There are controversies about the chemicals that we can put on the fields at the moment in terms of insecticides and things like that to keep the harvests healthy. What's the NFU's point of view on that?
Well, the key, the main one at the moment has been the glyphosate lobbying. So glyphosate is what we would all use in our garden, which you can buy from the garden centre or even the supermarket under the brand of Roundup.
I'm sure other brands are available.
They are, sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Weedall, I think, is one of those.
Right, so, but, as long as you mention a couple of them.
But so glyphosate is a chemical which is a herbicide, and it's used in farming. You start to have dominant weeds that will appear in farming, and you can blanket spray a field with glyphosate, and you will kill the grass and you'll kill the weeds coming over. But the benefits of that are you can then also leave a field fallow. So you can leave a field fallow over winter, and then you can spray it off with glyphosate, and then you can drill it with a spring crop. If you don't have the access to glyphosate, you will then have to do several more passes. You will then have to plough over winter time. So you don't have particularly the field as a habitat over the winter time for wildlife, for nesting birds, lapwings, partridges, that kind of thing. And there are environmental benefits to using this chemical. Now, the Green Lobby in Europe, which is a very powerful lobby, tried to ban glyphosate by saying it was carcinogenic. So therefore, it could lead to cancer, and it was.
So it would lead to. They're saying, and you're disagreeing with this clearly, that they're saying that the crops grown on fields that have been treated with this chemical can then harm human beings.
Yeah, and we're very pleased to see, sort of in the last week, that the European Union or the European Commission has said that there is no carcinogenic link to glyphosate. So that argument by the Green Lobby has now been discounted, and we are now hoping that the chemical will be relicensed and will be relicensed for a decent period of time, as it's a very important tool for farming. It's a very important tool, and the carcinogenic qualities of glyphosate. When it was actually sort of the scientific results came out, it was actually sort of further down the list than coffee, for example. So it's one of those things where the Green Lobby look at it. I think there was all other reasons of why they were looking at sort of banning glyphosate, because if you ban glyphosate, you need to use glyphosate to farm with genetically modified crops, for example, in countries such as America and India and South America. They use glyphosate for farming with GM, and I think that was one of the reasons of why they were wanting to ban it here in Europe, where obviously we don't farm with genetically modified crops. So I think that was one of the reasons behind the lobbying, but we were pleased to see that common sense prevailed and the word of the scientists was used to make the decision and not the word of pressure.
There's another chemical involving nicotine as well.
Yeah, neonicotinoids. So neonicotinoids is a seed dressing which was it was widely used on oilseed rape over here. So it was used to stop an insect called the cabbage stem flea beetle. So it was coated on the seed. It was a direct application. So your seed would be blue or pink and coated when it was.
I think the cabbage stem seed beetle sounds very sweet.
Well, you need a microscope to see one. So it's when your rape crop is planted, it's got a direct application on it, and then the plant grows. So oilseed rape will go, comes into flower. But then it was by environmental pressure was proved that it was, they argued that it was having a detrimental effect on bees. So it then got banned. We've seen no results of sort of where bee health has sort of gained or improved. Since then, they didn't even take into account sort of climatic changes. So whether you have a warm winter or a cold winter. And as a result, you have seen yields fall in oilseed rape. You've seen oilseed rape, the acreage certainly this year is well down what it has been previously. And there are reports saying that because the rape acreage is down, actually that's not good for insects because they like to pollinate on the crop.
Happy news for hay fever sufferers, though.
Well, maybe. But you're now seeing this ban. They're looking at extending it to non-flowering crops now, which doesn't make sense with the bee argument. So sugar beet, for example, which was always treated with, the seed was always treated with neonicotinoids. The European Parliament and the environmental lobbies are now looking at sort of banning it on the use of sugar beet. So we are objecting to that, and we are campaigning against it. And we hope that it is a science-based decision and not a decision made on certainly environmental lobbying.
Andrew, before we finish, we've only got a couple of minutes. I do want to just ask you about rural crime and the fact that the countryside is not necessarily policed as you would wish, and certainly not as intensively as urban communities are. People are just stealing tractors.
Yeah, rural crime is a broad area, and certainly here in Lincolnshire, I know Lincolnshire Police struggles with its funding because we're such a large county. We're a very rural county. And we don't have main roads coming through here, which affects the police funding structure.
No motorways in Lincolnshire.
Yeah, so as a result, Lincolnshire Police are pushing for more and more money, but they do have stretched resources, and the police funding model is at the moment doesn't really work for Lincolnshire. But yeah, we see a lot of tractor thefts here, which are as a result of organised crime. They're sometimes out of the country before the farmer has even been to the shed that morning.
How do you smuggle a tractor out of the country without anybody noticing?
In containers. We've even seen where you've had lorries that are full of wheat that will have 5 quad bikes in them going out of the country. They're in containers, they get broken down. It's a very organised, sophisticated network, and from here they go to Eastern Europe used to be a hotbed. They go to certain parts of Africa. They're valuable pieces of kit. You can spend upwards of £150,000, £200,000 on a tractor. So they are worth a lot of money.
It's almost like my imagination cannot stretch to smuggling agricultural equipment off an island, for goodness sake, off an island. Anyway, but beyond that, there's also a problem with hare coursing. Hare
coursing is one of the main issues here in Lincolnshire, but we're very pleased to say that the Lincolnshire Police are working very, very closely with the NFU, and they're doing an awful lot of work to try and combat it. Because of the lie of the land here in Lincolnshire, it does make us an obvious target. We've got lots of low, flat land that's all arably cropped, so it does make it a good place for hare coursers to come. But Lincolnshire Police certainly have sort of beefed up their operation on hare coursing. They've got extra funding for it.
On that very cheerful and positive note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, Andrew. Join me again next time for Hot Topic, when we will be discussing the general election.